clarification, and the idea here is to come up with some stronger ideas about how the two sides of the Pacific might productively engage with each other. And I'll briefly introduce the four speakers and then have them take the floor in the order in which I mentioned them. We're delighted to have Dr. Min Zhu, national of People's Republic of China, currently working in Washington now as the Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. Those of you who go to many international meetings know that he is one of the most distinguished voices on international monetary issues, but also on broader macroeconomic trends, and we're delighted to have him here. Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Korea, Cho Tae-yul, really happy to have Korea here. It was noted yesterday that Colombia was the only country of Latin America that sent troops to the Korean War, and there is a special relationship between Colombia and Korea as a consequence of that shared experience. We're delighted to have with us Cesar Purisima, Secretary of Finance of Philippines. He's been a longtime friend of the IISS, and last year gave a IISS Fullerton lecture in Singapore, in front of the business community of Singapore, that was enormously well received. The Philippines is the chair of APEC this year, which will take place in the third week of November, just before the G20 summit. And so it's very interesting to have a voice from the chairmanship of APEC at this event here. And we're really delighted to have Toshiro Suzuki, the Ambassador at Large for International Economic Issues of Japan. Japan is now negotiating a free trade agreement with Colombia. I think the 10th round of negotiations took place yesterday in Bogota. So the Ambassador at Large is actively engaged in searching for those stronger institutional relations between his country and Colombia, and of course generally with the Pacific Alliance as well. So with that preface, could I invite Dr. Min Zhu, Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, to take the floor. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, John.
Muchas gracias por su invitación. Y específicamente quiero agradecerles por haberme sacado del frío de Washington a esta ciudad encantadora, especialmente en este momento cuando hay tanta nieve y frío en Washington. Muchas gracias. En estos comentarios de 10 minutos quiero mencionar 3 puntos. El primero es que los dos continentes trabajando tan de cerca en este momento, y Latinoamérica es parte de la cadena de suministro vertical desde ya. La segunda parte es que Asia está cambiando. Asia se está volviendo más liviano, lo cual es un desafío y también una oportunidad para la cooperación. El tercer punto es que estamos en este momento, la cooperación está cambiando una nueva etapa. El primero, que ambas han estado trabajando muy de cerca en un proceso de 10 años. Las exportaciones de este país a Asia incrementó de 20.000 millones a 200.000 millones, 10 veces. La exportación a la China en un horizonte de 10 años incrementó 50 veces ya. Los flujos han sido fuertes. Japón suministró 10.000 millones en el último año a este continente, y la China suministró 10.000 millones y una línea de crédito también. Así que a medida que los dos continentes trabajan de forma más estrecha, ya se está haciendo. Tuvimos un
What we found is today the world is in a very interesting structures. We define the world into 3 big clusters. The one big cluster is advanced economy, basics is service and financial. The second cluster is energy group, including also Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, and for example Russians, regardless of geographical positions, because they share the commonality. The third group is very much is Asian integrated vertical supply chain, and many Latin American countries belong to that part. And one typical phenomenon we see when they move together is co-movements increase dramatically. For example, the emerging Asia equity market and equity market in Latin America has a co-movement roughly moving from 10 years ago, 42%. So these two markets move together with 42% in common. Today, rise to 81%. Can you believe it? These two markets can move thousands of miles apart. They move together 81% the same direction. And the news from Asia, particularly from China, do have profound impacts on the financial sectors, on economic indicators as well. So through decades cooperations, these two continental, I call closely integrated through trade and capital flow, and closely interconnected through the business cycle, through co-movements, through co-activity of economic activity as well. Indeed, these two continents today become a really big economic zone of the world now. Now things are changing. That's the second point. Asia is changing. Growth is moderate, but still strong. But most important thing is Asia become light. In the sense, investment growth is weak, consumption growth is pushed up, Asia become more and more consumption, domestic consumption-driven growth model, and the growth is strong, middle class grow up, wealth accumulating, financial sector grows strongly. Could you have profound impact on this region? Our studies show, for example, if China have a 1% of GDP below the baseline, will have a negative 0.5% of GDP impact on the commodity export countries in this region. For example, our study shows if China drop 1% of investments, of GDP of investments, will have a negative 0.2% to 0.3% varies across different commodity exports to China. Let me say it one again. It's not GDP to GDP. It's if China drop 1% GDP of investments. Currently, China have a 44% of GDP of investments, which is way, way high, which is not sustainable. We suggest that China drop the investment share from GDP 44 to 34%. That means in a certain period, China will reduce investment 10% of GDP. How much will impact on the commodity exports economy in this continental? It will be huge. However, it will not happen overnight. So when China rebalancing its internal economic structures, the region need to adjust its trade, its cooperation relationship with China as well. Will be more diversified, not only focus on the commodity. Otherwise, will be profound impact by this global structure change. So I think this is a very important change. So Asia become the light and change the whole thing. So there's a move to the third point I would like to point out. The cooperation should and will move to I call the new normal. The new normal means the cooperation go beyond the commodity cycle. The new normal means the FDI, currently 50% of focus in the natural resource sector, will move. That means the new normal means the cooperation will be more broad-based to cover service sectors, consumer goods, agricultural goods, not only commodity at all, and the manufactured goods. The new normal means the cooperation not only focus on the big company, the resource sector, will be more broad to the SME, to all the different sectors as well, have a more broader base to work with is to China as well. I think that this is absolutely important. And the financial sector cooperation also will enhance in a big way. In the past 10 years, Asia attracted $1 trillion FDI, but Asia exports 4 trillion financial capital flow. So net export is 3 trillion. With wealth accumulation, Asia financial market will develop. So Asia financial market is a rich mine for the Latin American. So working on the financial sector will be also the key. When the middle class grow up, demand for the consumer goods, for example, for fashions, for all these different things, will increase. And tourists increase. In China, for example, every year, 100 million people go abroad as a tourist. So service sector become big chunk of corporations in the futures as well. It imposes challenges because they need a policy shift away from focus on natural resource to all the other sectors, support SME, support the education infrastructure as well. But this is a big opportunity. If you're looking for the other side, the changing cooperation model to the new normal, it is a challenge, it's an opportunity, but it's more profound, go far beyond than economic and financial cooperation, because it's a bring profound impact on the social, on the cultural, on all the other things in this region. For example, if the enhanced SME join these broader corporations, the government need a policy to support SME, financing SME, particularly invest in the innovative SME. I think that's very important. For example, the corporation will move into the high technology side, technology transfer, technology innovation become more important, and the policy will move into that way. And the more broader cooperation means that will cooperate with Asia will help to reduce income inequality. So this new normal not only changing the model of the cooperation, will have a profound impact on the social aspect for this region as well. So I think it's very important, and we are very much looking forward for this new normal. To sum it up, my time is very much up. I still have 42 seconds. To sum it up, number one, the two continental is closely integrated, closely interconnected already. Asia is changing, become light, which impose the new model, new challenges, new opportunities for the corporations. We move into the new normal, which is more broad-based, more broad in the sense not only commodity, but service, consumer goods, agriculture, and innovative IT, financial sectors. I think that's the future of the corporations, which will bring the opportunity for economic financial activities, but more profoundly will bring in the opportunity to change the social change as well, will improve the social equality issues, will getting more middle class growth up in this country, and also will help and lead the government has more investments in infrastructure, in education as well. Today, Asian growth moderated, lower, but still roughly 5.3% for this year, and for the next few years, still account 50% global GDP. So it is still the global growth engine. And this two-continent cooperation, I would say, is the key, is the most important economic affair for this century. The space, the scope, the potential, the future for the cooperation is unlimited. In this sense, I think Asia and Latin American will be the main trend of this century. In this sense, this conference IISS organized, held in this beautiful city, will be historical. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that superb macro perspective. I think what we'll want to discuss in detail once we move to the Q&A session is how we get from here to there. In the next speaker, we're delighted to have the Vice Foreign Minister of Korea.
Thank you, Dr. Chapman, for your introduction. First of all, I'd like to express my appreciation to IISS, the government of Colombia, for inviting me to this inaugural meeting of the Cartagena Dialogue, the Trans-Pacific Summit. It is absolutely clear why IISS selected Pacific Alliance as the main theme as it launches the Cartagena Dialogue. It is because the Pacific Alliance is not only the new model for regional integration in Latin America, but also it has been expanding its geo-economic and political influence in the international community by making impressive progress in a short span of time. Korea has also been paying attention to the great potential for cooperation with the member countries of the Pacific Alliance since even before its inception. By selecting Chile as our first ever partner for free trade agreement back in 2003, and then later concluding FTAs with Peru and Colombia, we have laid a solid foundation for cooperation framework with the Pacific Alliance on a bilateral basis. The only missing link in this FTA network with this alliance is between Korea and Mexico, but the dialogue has been underway between the two governments to restart the negotiations for bilateral FTA, which was suspended in 2008. And in 2013, a framework for multilateral cooperation with the Pacific Alliance was established by Korea's acceptance into the alliance as an observer country. Today, as a representative of an observer country of the Pacific Alliance and a major trading nation in Asia, I'm pleased to share with you Korea's perspective on the Pacific Alliance and its vision for future cooperation with the alliance. More than anything else, trust lies at the foundation of Korea's perspective towards the Pacific Alliance. Trust accumulated through our traditional ties of friendship and cooperation, shaped by Colombia's participation in the Korean War in the early 1950s, and many exchanges of visits between our leaders and those of the alliance over the past decades. We feel boundless trust towards the consistency of the alliance, with which they have been resolutely upholding the values and principles of democracy and market economy. The Pacific Alliance, launched 3 years ago, has been growing steadily year after year, with the free movement of people and commodities, as well as the integration of the stock market. This was possible because the alliance was able to move single-mindedly towards integration and openness, based on democratic legitimacy and popular support. It is only natural that Korea has faith in the Pacific Alliance that is bound together by these shared values and interests. Second, Korea feels a sense of camaraderie with the countries of the Pacific Alliance. As is well known, during the last century, Latin America was a scene of intense competition for theories of economic growth. Different views towards open markets and the global economic system still remain. However, due to the dazzling growth of the Pacific Alliance, the debate over the theories of economic growth in Latin America is now somewhat losing steam. If the dependence theory, which advocated a road of independent growth by cutting itself off from the international economic system, was the winner in the 1980s, then the true winner in the era of connectivity of the 21st century is the Pacific Alliance. This is illustrated by the amount of foreign investment the alliance has attracted, the willingness of countries like Panama and Costa Rica to join it as full-fledged members, and the number of observer countries which has now reached 32, encompassing virtually all continents of the globe. We feel a sense of comradeship with the alliance because we also have been enhancing our competitiveness by relentlessly pursuing an open economy. We chose competition over isolation and focused on satisfying the needs of new customers while exploring new markets. Korea as it stands today would not exist if it were not for the learning by exporting and the ambitious integration into the international economic system. The reason why Korea welcomes the alliance policy of pivot to Asia, a policy to promote cooperation with Asia, is because cooperation between Korea and the Pacific Alliance, both models of successful policies of open economy, can send a clear message to today's global economy full of uncertainty. In particular, given that the WTO Doha round negotiations are failing to make progress, the Pacific Alliance's pursuit of open regionalism will add new momentum to reaching an agreement on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Korea, which has enjoyed economic growth by reaping the benefits of the multilateral trading system, has been pushing for greater trade liberalization through aggressively expanding its FTA network since the early 2000s, and now ranks number 3 in terms of total GDP of the countries with which it has concluded FTAs. If Korea joins the TPP sooner rather than later, the Pacific Alliance advocating a bridge to Asia and Korea emerging as an FTA hub for East Asia will greatly and significantly contribute to the development of the global free trading system as the two cornerstones of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. As such, Korea and the Pacific Alliance have been building a strong foundation for economic cooperation based on trust and a sense of camaraderie. During the past 10 years, Korea's trade with the Pacific Alliance increased by 263%, and last year reached $26 billion, which amounts to almost half of Korea's trade with Latin America as a whole. What is more encouraging is that our bilateral trade volume, which had declined in 2009 due to the global economic crisis, recovered immediately, and today our two-way trade is becoming even more vibrant than before. This illustrates that trade relationship between Korea and the alliance enjoys a significant degree of resilience thanks to the existing web of bilateral FTAs. Trade between Korea and Peru increased 67% when the bilateral FTA came into effect in 2011. This case attests to the trade promotion effect of FTAs. Korea's FTA with Colombia, which was signed in 2013, is expected to come into effect very soon. The Korea-Mexico FTA, if the negotiations are resumed and concluded, will dramatically increase trade between Korea and the Pacific Alliance. Recently, investment has also been showing an impressive growth. Korea's investment in the Pacific Alliance has been on the rise since the global economic crisis in 2009. In 2012 alone, it registered $540 million. Areas of Korea's investment in the alliance have also moved beyond mining and have expanded to manufacturing and services industries. It appears that the strategic values of the Pacific Alliance and the recent increase in their middle classes have brought on greater confidence among Korean investors. As the economies of the Pacific Alliance continue to grow, the infrastructure gap within the alliance will widen, and I anticipate that Korean companies can fill the growing gap and thus contribute to laying the foundation for sustainable growth of the alliance. Korean companies are recognized for their world-class technology, cost competitiveness, and project execution ability. I'm quite confident that they will be able to create high-quality jobs while carrying out high-value-added projects in the areas of energy, transport, and environment in the Pacific Alliance countries. Citigroup forecasted that the total infrastructure gap of Latin America will reach $170 billion in 2020. And last year, Korean companies won $6.7 billion worth of contracts in construction in Latin America. This indicates that competitive Korean companies are already making inroads and contributing to filling the infrastructure gap in Latin America. Ladies and gentlemen, the Pacific Alliance, which has accelerated its integration in a short period of time, has left a deep impression on many countries outside the region, including Korea. The Pacific Pumas are receiving acclaim for presenting a new model of regional integration by introducing a variety of bold and innovative measures and an early harvest policy which focuses on streamlining formalities and procedures and prioritizing attainable results. To make substantive contribution to such efforts for deeper and faster integration of the Pacific Alliance, Korea had proposed the Single Window Project. This project of building a state-of-the-art regional customs system will contribute to increasing intra-trade within the alliance, which currently stands at a mere 4%, in stark contrast to its high level of trade liberalization of 92%. By linking together all the necessary information for export and imports, It will prevent the duplication of unnecessary documents. This in turn will accelerate the export and import process of member states, ultimately paving the way for trade expansion and economic integration of the member states of the Pacific Alliance. In addition, we support the efforts of the Pacific Alliance to raise its visibility and recognition, such as the initiatives for operating a joint trade office and holding joint trade expositions. We've been taking measures to better inform our public and companies about the Pacific Alliance, the world's 8th largest economy, boasting the best business environment in Latin America, and value-driven alliance adhering to the principles of democracy and market economy. A strategist of our generation, Dr. Brzezinski, once said, and I quote, "The first and most important is to emphasize the enduring nature of the alliance relationship, in particular with Europe, which does share our values and interests, even if it disagrees with us on specific policies." Like his saying, sharing values is sharing the future, and the relations between countries that share the future will remain strong. I'm confident that the Pacific Alliance's commitment towards democracy and market economy will remain steadfast, and I hope that the Alliance will disseminate these common values throughout Latin America by strengthening the identity and pride of the Alliance and by continuing to mark exemplary growth through proper economic policies. As a reliable partner for the open regionalism pursued by the Pacific Alliance and as its observer country, Korea will continue to support the development of the Alliance and strengthen our partnership with it. Discussions at this Cartagena dialogue on a wide range of issues related to the Trans-Pacific Partnership will provide importance and food for thought for Korea in designing its policy towards the Pacific Alliance in particular and Latin America in general. If you take the initials from the words Pacific Alliance and the Republic of Korea, it will make PARK, P-A-R-K, the last name of our president. Strengthening our partnership with Pacific Alliance is very much high on the agenda of the President Park, and this is the message that I wanted to deliver to you today. I very much appreciate this opportunity to participate in this special event and to share some of my thoughts with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for spelling out Pacific Alliance, Republic of Korea cooperation. And could I invite Cesar Purisima to take the floor?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jan, for inviting me to come all the way here to Colombia. Looking at the audience this morning, this meeting could easily be in Manila. If I look at the nameplates, now of course I see Asian surnames, but I also see Hispanic surnames that can easily be Filipino surnames. That's why when I was in the airport immigration yesterday and I presented my passport, the immigration officer had to take a second look at me because my passport said Purisima, but I didn't look like a Purisima at all. No? Which leads me to my first point. The idea of a Trans-Pacific alliance between Latin America and Asia is not a new one. Over 450 years ago, the galleon trade between Acapulco and Manila started, and that lasted over 250 years. In the galleon trade, basically what was exchanged was New World silver from Latin America in exchange for porcelain, lacquerware, manufactured goods from China at the time. The trade went through the Philippines as a transshipment point between Latin America and Asia. In fact, as a reference point, most of the California coast was explored as a way stop for the galleons coming back from Asia on the way back to Acapulco. Secondly, when the galleon trade was at its peak, China was the world's largest economy then. Between 1500 to 1870, China was the world's largest economy. In fact, between 1 AD and 1870, Asia as a whole was the leading economy of the world based on Agnes Madison's contour of the world economy. So the reemergence of China as the world's largest economy on a PPP basis last year in 2014 is not new. It is just China regaining its position that it used to have over 200 years ago. And in the future, when you look at Asia, Asia will have 2/3 of the world's middle class, and this middle class will consume about 60% of middle class consumption in the world. And therefore, I think reestablishing the galleon trade for the 21st century between Latin America through the Pacific Alliance and Asia really makes sense. The big question is, how do we reestablish this galleon trade of the 21st century? My first point, I think, is we need clarity of vision on both sides. On the side of the Pacific Alliance, I think it needs clarity of what its role is in the overall scheme of things. The desire to reach out to the Pacific is a good starting point. But I think it must create a vision of its role within Latin America itself. To start with, maybe it should start positioning itself as the hub of inter-Latin America trade, similar to how ASEAN is positioning itself as the hub of intra-Asia trade. I think that's a very important first step because of the distance between our two regions. No? It's important that we gain scale. And Pacific Alliance, although it's a big aggregation, no, can even become more compelling by positioning itself as the hub of inter-Latin America trade. How does that happen? How do you make that a reality? First is connectivity. I was told yesterday that one of the attendees here from, I guess, Peru, took over almost 8 hours, I think, to fly from Peru to Colombia. So near yet so far. This is where the role of connectivity is. That is very true in our region also. Moving goods within the Philippines can cost more than moving goods from Manila to Thailand or Manila to Houston. Connectivity through infrastructure is very important if we are to reestablish the galleon trade of the 21st century. Connectivity through having gold standard free trade agreements, I think, is also important within the region as well as across the Pacific. In fact, this position of mine obviously is not the official position because I'm a finance minister and not a trade minister. I think given the distance between the two regions, it probably makes sense to just drop tariffs completely. Because to begin with, there's a natural tariff in the distance and the cost of transportation between the two regions. So I think second condition is that we must continue to work on establishing free trade agreements within our respective regions and across the Pacific. Third, I think there must be a channel for sharing information. Today's world of internet obviously makes that easier, but there are many barriers of culture, barriers of language. I think we must make the extra step to make it easier, especially for the medium-sized to smaller companies, to be able to find out what the opportunities are across the oceans. Integration can happen at many levels. Integration at the top can happen easily because the Mitsubishis of the world, the large companies of the world, will find you wherever you are. Whether there's a free trade agreement or there's connectivity, they will establish it because they have the infrastructure. Real integration, I think, happens when over 90% of our companies, which are SMEs, are able to engage profitably in trade across the Pacific. And that's harder because they don't have the infrastructure. And therefore, we as governments, businessmen, especially the large companies, should facilitate this integration. Earlier, our friend from the IMF mentioned the fact that Asia is a major exporter of capital. And I think that's very important. And therefore, we need to continue to integrate our financial systems. One thing that the Pacific Alliance did that quite impressed me was the fact that in less than 4 years, they were able to integrate their stock markets. This is something that ASEAN's been trying to do for a long time. So I think this augurs well for the Pacific Alliance countries that with the political will that has been exhibited so far, I think that the vision of using Pacific Alliance as a way to create the bridge back to Asia can indeed become a reality. Finally, I want to talk about the Philippines. No? I think you know that the Philippines is probably the Latin American country in Asia. In fact, in the World Bank, we're part of the Latin American aggregation, not part of the Asian aggregation. So I would propose that to our friends from Colombia, Peru, Chile, and Mexico, in reaching out to Asia, reach out to home, which is the Philippines. In the Philippines, you will see guayaberas called barongs. In the Philippines, you will see Filipinos named Purisima. In the Philippines, we say, how are you as kamusta, which is como esta in your language. I think the Philippines would be an ideal position, again, to establish its role as a transshipment point in the galleon trade of the 21st century. We are part of an aggregation called ASEAN, which is almost the same size as the Pacific Alliance here in Latin America. And I think if we work together, ASEAN and the Pacific Alliance as the hubs of our respective regions, then the chances of truly reestablishing this route will, I think, become a reality sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I know under the Mexican presidency of the Pacific Alliance, the idea of getting a more organized link with ASEAN is very much at the top of their agenda. So one hopes that Secretary Meade and his colleagues are able to orchestrate that collaboration that you just advocated. From Japan, Special Ambassador.
Well, first of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to IISS for the invitation, and also to the Colombian government for hosting this very interesting, important gathering. My predecessors talked about a lot of creative and grandeur ideas about the relationship, but I'd rather talk about a little bit what Japan would expect from the alliance and how Japan can be relevant to this alliance. First, I'd like to start by saying that how much importance we attach to this alliance. Actually, I arrived from Bogota after a week of talks with my Colombian friends in the 10th round of negotiations for the Japan-Colombia Economic Partnership Agreement. And the Economic Partnership Agreement is a FTA. When this negotiation is concluded, Japan will have EPAs with all of the Pacific Alliance members. As a matter of fact, Japan has followed closely the Pacific Alliance since its inception as one of the first observers. Keidanren, on the other hand, Japan's influential business organization, has also set up a task force on the Pacific Alliance. And political level, last summer, Prime Minister Abe visited Colombia shortly after the President Santos was re-elected. He also visited Mexico and Chile in the same trip, and he also had another meeting with President Humala, Peru, a couple of months later. In this trip, Prime Minister Abe was accompanied by a delegation of 250 businessmen, including 70 CEOs. The Japanese business community has its eyes set on this region. Of course, we have talked a lot about how Pacific Alliance is attractive, but I'd like to repeat some points. The Pacific Alliance draws considerable attention for a number of economic factors, vast potential for economic growth, which every one of the member countries has already been demonstrating, the size of its combined economy, which is equivalent to ASEAN's as a whole, and of course a wide array of natural resources, and perhaps human resources. That said, for the Pacific Alliance to realize its full potential, it also has to deal with a number of economic challenges. Japan could contribute in these endeavors in some ways. But anyway, among them, I'd like to cite three main challenges. One of them is to diversify its production base by increasing competitiveness of the manufacturing industry. The recent decline in resource prices has a certain adverse effect on the region's economy, but it also means a great opportunity, I think. Japan has a long history of investment in the manufacturing industry in Latin America. For example, Nissan Mexico has started operation since the late 1950s. More often than not, such investments have been made with a long-term perspective. They have created fair employment and provided adequate training. They have nurtured amicable relations with the local communities. However, I have to say, while China is getting bigger and bigger and more grander and getting more important, well, somehow or other, in the recent decades, Japanese investment in Latin America has remained at rather a decent level, below its probably full potential. For example, in the Pacific Alliance countries combined, we still count approximately 1,000 Japanese firms established. On the other hand, for example, in Thailand alone, we have more than 1,500 Japanese companies. So we still have a good room for development. Japanese firms may have been less active due to the lost decade in Latin America, a decade most characterized by political instability and exorbitant foreign debts, and also followed by Japan's lost decades, which started 1990s. But now things are getting different. Abenomics, what so-called Abenomics, is bearing fruit. The Japanese economy has begun to pick up once again. In fact, last October, we counted more than 800 Japanese companies just in Mexico, which is actually twice the number of 2009. The most salient increase was observed in the automotive sector, including supporting industries. Now more than ever, Japanese firms are producing and purchasing parts on the ground. Therefore, instead of depending on imports. So I would say that we can expect this upward trend in investment to maintain itself, if not accelerate, for time to come. The second challenge is to improve the region's production capacity by creating value chains that are integrated into the global value chains. For that purpose, several efforts should be made. Improving logistics with appropriately developed infrastructure, enhancing both inter-regional and intra-regional connectivity, developing competitive logistics service, facilitating trade, and this is some number of my predecessors have touched upon, harmonizing trade and investment-related regulations. It is also getting more and more important to strengthen small and medium-sized enterprises. Japan has experience in these areas. For example, in ASEAN, Japan has a number of projects together with ASEAN members to support its connectivity through, for example, by conducting harmonizations of the regulations by assisting the maintenance of land and maritime infrastructure and by providing adequate trading. I would mention in this respect, last month, the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry conducted seminars here in Colombia and in Mexico on how a master plan on the Pacific Alliance infrastructure could be explored with the alliance members. The discussion on the master plan is expected to be furthered. The third challenge is raising productivity and enhancing technological capacity to produce value-added goods. For that purpose, education and training count a great deal. It is our task to create for the younger generation a brighter future. Japan can work with the Pacific Alliance here as well. Japan's universities are active in the area of research and development, and they are working increasingly on industry-university joint research. The University of Tokyo, for example, held so-called University of Tokyo Forum with the Catholic University of Chile and other universities in 2013. Almost 80 universities gathered for the second Japan-Mexico Universities Dean Conference last year. Japanese universities are also interested in recruiting more students from the region to study in Japan. Of course, these economic factors I have just taken up premises that the society is equipped with the predictability, which gives economic players confidence and security to engage in sound business activities. This, needless to say, requires the rule of law. On that, the rule of law which is fair and clear for all. The people of the Pacific Alliance countries have over decades developed democracies and implemented steadily the rule of law. Upon that foundation, they have nurtured market-based economies. Therefore, with good prospects for further growth and political stability, I'm convinced that this also constitutes a viable base for us to work together, hand in hand, to build a resilient and sustainable economy. As the Pacific Alliance aims to strengthen ties with Asia, the Pacific Ocean connects us together. Here, let me quote what Prime Minister Abe stated in his speech at the last year's Shangri-La Dialogue. Quote, "Today, the benefits for each of us lie in the seas from the Pacific to the Indian Oceans, being made thoroughly open as a place of freedom and peace. All of us should find one common benefit in keeping our oceans and skies as global commons, where the rule of law is respected throughout to the merit of the world and humankind." End of quote. The Pacific Alliance becomes fully Pacific when connecting with Asia. Japan can be a willing and useful partner in achieving this endeavor. And Prime Minister Abe also called for, during his tour to this region last year, progresar juntos, liderar juntos, inspirar juntos. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Suzuki, thank you very much indeed. So those are our four opening statements. I'd invite those of you who would like to engage with our panelists to show up your cards, and if you give me, if you keep them up for a moment, I'll be able to make a list. Excellent. Thank you very much. Could I first ask Dino Patel from Indonesia?
Thank you very much. A couple observations and suggestions. One, before I came here, I told some media friends and university professors that I was going to a Pacific Alliance dialogue in Cartagena. And the immediate response was, is that a new military bloc, you know? Because the term alliance in the language of Indonesians and perhaps most Asians equate with geostrategic connotation. So I think we got to do double efforts to tell them that this is more about diplomatic and economic grouping. And I think one way that we should use is the netizens. In Indonesia, politicians have one office by way of netizens. You know, they have millions and followers and great networking. So I think that is one way to spread the message. But one advantage is that countries of Pacific Alliance do not have any historical baggage and no political impediments in Asia, in Indonesia. So that makes it a lot easier for them to penetrate. Secondly, I think I speak on behalf of the other Southeast Asians here that when Pacific Alliance countries think of Asia, make sure you don't think of China, Japan, or Korea. You know, think of Southeast Asia. I mean, it's one whole. Think of Southeast Asia also. You know, and I think that point was very was made quite well by Mr. Caesar. Observer countries, there are too many forums where observer countries come and attendance is done by a desk officer at the foreign ministry level. I think it's very important to make serious efforts to make sure that serious and heavy delegations from the Chamber of Commerce, especially from this SME side, attend the Pacific Alliance meetings, and I agree that this is where the action is, and this is where most of public attention will be gained if we engage more SMEs. I also want to share the lesson of ASEAN that would be relevant to Pacific Alliance. ASEAN was diplomacy-driven, elite-driven, and the challenge was how to make that into a people-centered association. And I believe this same challenge will be also faced by Pacific Alliance. How is it something that is diplomacy-driven will go all the way down to the grassroots and become a real movement on the ground? Last suggestion is I would advise Pacific Alliance to pick one major university in Asian countries to do a center to study and promote the idea of Pacific Alliance. I think having one focus agent for Pacific Alliance would be a good start to the public to capture public imagination on the alliance. Thank you.
From Korea, Mr. Park, Jin Park.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I very much agree with the presentation by Dr. Min Zhu from China, who emphasized the interconnectivity between Asia and the Pacific Alliance. And also, I think it is very appropriate to emphasize the strategic values between Asia and also Pacific Alliance. It is very significant from the viewpoint of Korea that the IISS dialogue is contributing significantly to the promotion of this partnership between the two sides. Especially Cartagena is a place where Colombian soldiers were sent to Korea in a destroyer called Admiral Padilla. So it certainly has a significance in that sense. I'd like to make three observations regarding the subject. First, the Pacific Alliance, from Korean viewpoint, has made a significant progress in terms of internal cohesion and internal communication. But still, it looks like this alliance is more focused on the internal integration rather than reaching out to Asia. For example, we haven't seen the joint tariff policy of Pacific Alliance with regard to other countries, including Asia. The second is that there seems to be a different priorities of concern between Asia and the Pacific Alliance. For example, from Korean viewpoint, we are very much interested to know how will be the future of the stability and the security environment of the countries in Pacific Alliance, the business environment, whereas the Pacific Alliance seems to be more interested in the market opening, especially agricultural market in Asia. So in order to resolve these problems, we need to upgrade and expand our communication. The joint trade office idea, I think, is an excellent one. And in Korea, we have a trade office by Mexico, but not a joint trade office with Colombia, Peru, and Chile. So certainly we need to move in that direction. And also from Korean viewpoints, the most promising areas or desirable areas of cooperation would include mining industry and transportation and the renewable energy, which in our view would really make great progress in the future. Finally, let me make a comment on the strategic issue. Asia and Pacific Alliance countries will need to understand each other much more closely from the strategic perspective, because it will certainly help understand not only the economic symbiosis, but also the strategic cooperation. 2015 is a very significant year for Asia. We commemorate the 70th anniversary of the end of the Pacific War. At the same time, between Korea and Japan, we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the diplomatic relationship. But due to territorial issues and history issues, we are not able to resume our trilateral summit meeting between Korea, Japan, and China, as the countries in the Pacific Alliance are doing for the summit meeting. So in that sense, our engagement with the Pacific Alliance would really help the three countries in feedback to promote their communication and cooperation across the Pacific in terms of promoting our cooperation with the Pacific Alliance countries. Let me make one last point. Vice Minister Cho Tae-yol has emphasized, and I totally agree, that the principles of democracy and market economy is very important to bring these two sides closer together across the Pacific. But also we have a cultural values that we share with the Latin American countries. Korea is certainly a family-oriented society. We love music, we love singing, we love football, and we are optimistic people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, we had the proposition of ASEAN Pacific Alliance meetings, now essentially a 3+4 idea of how Japan, Korea, and China could perhaps meet jointly with the Pacific Alliance. So that's another policy idea to conjure with. Jose Antonio Belaunde from Peru, please.
Muchas gracias, John, y gracias por la invitación.
Thank you, John, and thank you for the invitation. We're pleased to be here with you once again. One of the things that is worrying in this dialogue that the Institute promotes, and it must be congratulated for it, but how can we bring these dialogues down to earth? One thing, for instance, that is notable, at least from the perspective of a person that isn't intimately familiar with the procedures, is that 3 of the 4 countries are in APEC, while a 4th country can't be part of it for reasons that we know. But can we imagine a Colombia that is not in the APEC due to the moratorium, but that could become incorporated to something that will be different, despite the fact that it's going to be part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
And when we have a moment, Barry Desker, and then Martin.
Thank you, John. In reaching out to the Asia-Pacific, I think the Pacific Alliance should promote business-to-business integration and exchanges, increase connectivity through air and sea links, and people-to-people exchanges through the promotion of tourism and student exchanges. My worry is that a focus on government-to-government ties would create a diplomatic community with shallow roots in their respective communities. The next stage in Pacific Alliance economic integration should be in promoting trade facilitation by lowering the costs of doing business, cutting redundant regulations, boosting education, and creating a workforce with the skills for 21st century economy. This will promote greater investment inflows from the East Asian region. And my third point, and this is a heresy from the standpoint of someone coming from Singapore, but I would argue that a cross-regional ASEAN-Pacific Alliance partnership agreement, or FTA, could be concluded more easily than the TPP. The TPP is, and I'm a supporter of it, is promoted as a state-of-the-art agreement on intellectual property, services, government procurement. However, it will have difficulty concluding negotiations on traditional trade issues such as agriculture, where protectionist lobbies in the United States and Japan, for example, are not likely to go much further than the concessions they've already agreed on in the WTO. Although the negotiations are due to conclude by May this year, my own assessment is that this target is unlikely to be met. In any case, we are already moving too near to the cycle for the 2016 presidential elections in the US for President Obama to successfully push for trade promotion authority. By contrast, I would argue that an ASEAN-Pacific Alliance FTA or partnership agreement, or similarly agreements with the East Asian countries, is likely to win support from both sides. And this could be a catalyst for TPP ratification by the US Senate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Marty Natalegawa from Indonesia, former Foreign Minister. Marty.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you for making it possible of my participation here at the dialogue. Throughout this morning, and thanks to the eloquence of the speakers, the ministers earlier this morning and today, just now as well, all of us have learned essentially that we have a great deal of confidence in the value of the Pacific Alliance. I have not heard anyone in this room spoken to the contrary. If anything, everyone simply reinforced how important and how valuable the Pacific Alliance is, and how, therefore, we need to strengthen cooperation with the Pacific Alliance. However, as we are all aware, any efforts to promote closer relations with the Pacific Alliance is not going to take place in a vacuum. We have in the Pacific agenda, so to speak, such a congested architecture. We have the various ASEAN-led processes. We have the TPP that some of us have mentioned. We have the APEC process, East Asia Summit, and many other examples of similar efforts are currently underway. And I know as a point of fact that in some capitals in Asia, not least in ASEAN, there is some inertia and a sense of exhaustion even in opening up new processes elsewhere. In my own experience within ASEAN, while Indonesia is always very much an external and open-oriented, after all, we have been pushing for the concept of ASEAN community in a global community of nations. Often case within ASEAN, we have to deal with other countries within ASEAN that are less than willing to be introducing new dialogue partners, lest it opens up the potential for new meetings that they feel rather burdensome. In other words, I feel that while if we were to take Pacific Alliance in isolation, as if this is the only game in town, all of us will no doubt speak of its importance and how we need to move forward the cooperation. But once we realize that it's only the one of many other processes that's underway, we have to be a bit more realistic. That is why I think, especially given the agenda is so overlapping, it's very important for us to have a more pragmatic snapshot of where we are in all the different forums, and to see where the Pacific Alliance cooperation with ASEAN and others can be adding value. My second point, just very briefly, John, as I'm sure we'll be talking about this later today and tomorrow, I think it's a little bit unrealistic to assume any Trans-Pacific dialogue to be focused only on economic matters. If the Pacific demonstrates certain reality, is how peace and security in the Pacific have enabled economic prosperity. And therefore, moving forward, the discussion on Trans-Pacific dialogue must be both security and economy, because they are actually very much intertwined and it's impossible to divorce. Thank you very much, John.
Pak Marty, thank you very much for two very important points, and reminding us that the security dimension is in fact very important, and that without security there can be no prosperity. And I invite everybody to pay a great deal of attention to the special sessions tomorrow morning that look at some of these security issues, and of course our fourth special plenary today that will examine it. And we are conscious that it's important to bring this security dimension with less coyness to the front, because as businesses look at this part of the world, they will be doing their geopolitical due diligence, their political risk analysis, and one of their first questions will be understanding the security context better, and that's something that IISS wants to reinforce a lot in its own work on not just the Pacific Alliance states, but generally throughout Latin America. And I think your point on institutional congestion is a valued one, which means that the organic links between this region need to be worked on as much as the institutional ones. Senator Cuevas from Mexico.
Muchas gracias, John.
Thank you very much, John. I find it very interesting that from this perspective of different Asian countries, that the Pacific Alliance is so interesting to these different countries. But this can be understood because both China, Korea, and Japan are among the top 10 commercial partners of the countries that make up the Pacific Alliance: Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile. Nevertheless, despite the fact that we can understand why it's attractive, there's also a reality, which is that in these spaces we discuss cooperation very much, we talk about goodwill. But when we go back to our countries, we find that, for instance, business people or SMEs do not discuss cooperation, they discuss competition. Competition in which they do not feel like they are on an even playing field, and they don't find the values that Mr. Cho referred to, which is camaraderie and trust. Despite the fact that we know that these are the practices, they are not experienced by the people who actually have to live with these sorts of agreements. So this disparity between cooperation and competition is resolved, I think, effectively by the alliance. When Mexico was discussing the FTA between Mexico and Peru, it met with certain resistance, especially with regards to agriculture and fishing. But only because these spaces for greater cooperation have to do with also resolving issues of competition. I think that as it regards Latin America and its relationship with Asia, a very interesting aspect would be how we can learn more from Asia in terms of logistic capacity and capacity for innovation, as we mentioned yesterday, the educational model, so that competition could be evened out. Today, if while China, Korea, and Japan are the three main commercial partners for the countries of the Pacific Alliance, if we look at it in the other way, neither Colombia, nor Peru, nor Chile are among the main exporters to any of these important Asian economies. How can we achieve, from your perspective, how can we even out the playing field? How can this option for competition become a space where entrepreneurs and business people from Latin America can have the trust, can feel that camaraderie, and feel more at liberty to sign free trade agreements with the large countries of Asia?
Muchas gracias. Y como ex embajador.
Well, thank you very much. And as the former ambassador of China and Chile and Colombia in different periods, I would like to make a few observations. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude and the joy I feel at this first meeting of the Cartagena Dialogue. Thank you to the Colombian government for hosting, and thank you and congratulations to the IISS for organizing this important event. Speaking of the Pacific Alliance, the countries that make up this alliance, China maintains good relations with all of them, friendly and cooperative relationships. And out of the 4 countries that make up this alliance, the countries that maintain economic and commercial relations, they are the main partners of China in this area. For instance, Chile, which was the first country to establish diplomatic relations with China in the early 70s, it was the first among South American countries. And it was also the first country to sign a free trade agreement, to which I would say I was personally involved in those negotiations as ambassador then. Now, with Chile, we've noticed a large increase in trade. And other countries such as Peru, Colombia, and Mexico, our relationship with those countries are also good. And after Chile, Peru was the second country that China signed an FTA with. And well, personally, I harbor a special admiration for these countries, since besides being an ambassador in 2 of them, I also conducted my studies in Mexico. Which contributed greatly to my own professional development. So, horizons are broadening with regards to China's relationships with all of Latin America. There has also been an important process of development. And over years, the first government meeting was held between China and Iraq. That meant that the main functioning of that forum, that cooperation forum between China, of the CELAC countries, it's a new mechanism for dialogue and cooperation between China and the region, an integrated cooperation. That means that the relationship between these 2 is entering a new stage.
Chairman,
Thank you very much.
all of you know very well, Latin America has a longest history in the world on the topic of regional integration, back from 19th century or back from 1960s. Several years ago, I did a research on comparing regional integration, degrees of regional integration across the world, and I found that East Asia is a lot behind Latin America in terms of institutional integration, de jure integration. But East Asia is a lot ahead of Latin America in terms of functional integration, de facto integration. In that sense, this morning's comments by Minister Olgin are saying that Pacific Alliance is not supposed to be a political scheme, but economic and business scheme. That comments draw a lot of attention of mine with the background of that kind of comparison. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there was one more there, I remember from earlier, if a person's... yes, right at the back then, please. And then we'll come back to the panel for 2 minutes each, or 2.5 minutes each. Please, go ahead.
Yes. I would like to ask, one of the prerequisites to become a member of the Pacific Alliance is to have a free trade agreement with the 4 countries. It has been mentioned that the 4 countries have FTAs, bilateral FTAs with many of them, but there is no coincidence, there is not exactly a coincidence with powers such as Korea or with China. My question would be whether they would be interested, these countries, to become a full member of the Pacific Alliance, and would they be willing to ask for that flexibility in order to become that members? Since the Pacific Alliance itself, it's a free trade agreement, it would not be that difficult to expect the same level of ambition if they become members and not necessarily having prior free trade agreements. So my question is that, and my just final comment is that I cannot think of any other mechanism that would give a greater impulse to the linkage between the Pacific Alliance and Asia than having the incorporation of an Asian country to the alliance.
Thanks. Well, that's an innovative policy suggestion. Let's come across the 4. Ambassador Suzuki, pick up 1 or 2 of the points that you thought might have been most directed to you. I don't think anyone has to answer all the questions, but I think each of you had some and that were directed towards you. You could pick up.
Well, I'd like to then break the ice, sort of. A number of issues has been cast, but we not in this session, but in the previous session as well. Panelists talked a lot about integration, and the comment made by I forgot the name, but was very relevant because when we talk about the integration, we tend to look at it in a very legal way. But as the intervention was clearly suggested, that like APEC, in the case of Asia, because of its political diversity, probably, Asia rather found a way to make it more invigorating in terms of de facto integration. I don't know the case of the Pacific Alliance, but definitely, judging from what I heard, they are still in the process of integration. But at the same time, they are trying to catch up their relationship with the outside world. Perhaps those 2 categories would give us a better answer, maybe in the future, how that integration should be managed within themselves and with the outside. That's my point. Another thing, I don't know, I've exhausted my time. Okay. I think that relates to other issues, but definitely the issue of trade and politics, how these issues are talked about, I think that's a very important point. Well, in the case of APEC, my understanding is that the politics has been effectively ruled out. But definitely trade and politics are related with each other. And I think that's very important. That perhaps the members of Atlantic Alliance, Pacific Alliance, and the other outside members can deepen the understanding in this respect, and so that there's an institutional issue like what I talked about, rule of law, and probably democracy. I don't know. There are many kinds of democracies. So, but it's very important so that we could relate with each other, understand each other. the last point is issue of cooperation and competition. I don't think these two subjects are contradictory with each other. When you take an example of investment or some form, of course, when the investments are made, you have to overcome a number of competitive issues within that country or or other competitors. But at the same time, investment includes a number of cooperative elements. Perhaps investment would enhance the ability of that country and invested countries, sort of experience in managing the country or managing or learning better technologies or sort of managing skills. So that relates to cooperative aspect. So I think that issue of cooperation and competition should be viewed in that sort of a rather integrated issue.
Thank you very much. Cesar Purissima.
90% of Asia trade with Latin America is accounted for by 4 countries: China, Japan, Korea, and India. On the other side of the world, 80% of Latin America trade with Asia is accounted by 4 countries also: Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, and Chile. So clearly, there is opportunity to expand the engagement. In the case of Asia, ASEAN is the major opportunity, because these 10 countries that is positioning itself, as I mentioned earlier, as the hub of Asia trade, can clearly play a major role. No? On the part of the Pacific Alliance, I think it needs to position itself similarly by expanding, at the same time making sure that it can become the hub that it hopes to be. No? Now, the Philippines is host of APEC this year. Our theme is inclusivity, both within the country and across countries. And this, I think, is an opportunity to further the engagement with the Pacific Alliance. Last night, over dinner, it was suggested by the Mexican foreign minister that in the meeting in Manila sometime in November, that there be a Pacific Alliance APEC meeting, and that Colombia be invited as an observer country. I relayed this to our foreign ministry. Obviously, it's not my decision, but I will be bringing the letter that was just handed to me by the foreign minister back to Manila, so that this can be decided upon. I think it is personally, I think it's a good idea. This is another way, as Foreign Minister Marty said, there's too many of these meetings. If we can hit several birds in one meeting, then this, I think, can help all of us. Beyond free trade agreements, there are many things that the Pacific Alliance region and Asia Pacific can do together. For example, in dealing with the effects of climate change. As you know, you are on the other side of the world, we are on a different part of the world, although we share the same ocean. From a risk management financial standpoint, we are uncorrelated or less correlated risk. So establishing insurance mechanisms to help our people better deal with the challenges of climate change, I think we start working together so that we can reduce the cost of dealing with this. Secondly, I support the initiatives mentioned by Dino earlier, especially in terms of reaching out to the grassroots. No? Because for me, integration at the top is not meaningful. More meaningful is integration that reaches out all the way to the grassroots. Because in the case of the Philippines, close to 98% of our businesses are small and medium enterprises. True, there will be those that will lose out in integration, but in the end, I think there will be more that will be winners. That's why I'm excited, especially for the Philippines, because somehow the Philippines can gain a lot in this potential re-engagement with Latin America, because as I said, the Philippines is Latin America lost in Asia. and maybe we can find our roots back when we reconnect with Latin America.
Thank you very much. I attracted to the idea of an APEC Pacific Alliance engagement. Of course, since 3 of the members of the Pacific Alliance are members of APEC, they might be on sort of both sides of the table, so there'll have to be a sort of a cunning way diplomatically to ensure that that conversation works around a table. Vice Minister Cho.
Let me first pick up the last question, which was directed to China or Korea, on whether China or Korea is interested in becoming a full member of the Pacific Alliance. But before I make comments on that question, let me point out that apart from our shared commitment to democracy and market economy, there are many compelling reasons why Korea is a perfect partner for Pacific Alliance. And the existing intricate web of bilateral FTAs Korea has built up over the past decade is one of the compelling reasons. And up until the year 2003, when Korea entered into negotiations for a bilateral FTA with Singapore, Korea had remained one of the only 2 countries in the world which had not concluded any single free trade agreement together with Mongolia. But in the 12-year time since then, we have been moving very fast to catch up with other trading partners in terms of the global and regional race for FTA networks. And now we have concluded 15 FTAs together with 53 countries. So it ranks number 3 in terms of the size and the coverage of the FTA networks. And so this indicates that Korea can serve as a kind of a launching pad or stepping stone or gateway for the Pacific Alliance countries to move into the Pacific market. So with or without membership in the Pacific Alliance, Korea is already a perfect partner for Pacific Alliance member countries, but it is not the observer countries who make the rules of the alliance. It is the member countries who make the rules, and if the members welcome the Korean and other Asian partners to join, then we will certainly consider it very positively. But it is not Korea or China to make a decision. That's the point I'd like to make. And one more thing I'd like to make comment on is China. I'm not in a position to speak for China today, but at the previous session, there were some talks about China and how the Pacific Alliance countries are looking at China in terms of balancing security ties with Washington. I'm not in a position to speak for the Pacific Alliance countries as well. But in my personal view, given the rise of China and the U.S. policy of rebalancing to Asia, Pacific Alliance is very much poised to play a very significant role in the emerging Pacific century, with their easy access to Pacific market, and with their past track records of expanding trade and investment between the 2 parts of the Pacific, and also their rich resources, which are quite necessary for the countries like China and Korea. So in this part of the world, the major players are playing a very different games with very different their own strategic and commercial calculuses. And U.S. rebalancing to Asia is a kind of a strategic response of the United States to the rising China. And the TPP is a core element of the U.S. policy of rebalancing or pivot to Asia. And the new kind of type of great power relations between Washington and Beijing, and the new Asia security concept presented by President Xi Jinping is a kind of a strategic response by the Chinese to the Asia-Pacific policy of the United States. But when we talk about TPP, many people believe that TPP is initiated by the Americans, but that's not the case. TPP was initiated by 4 smaller economies such as Chile, Singapore, Brunei, and Singapore, and in who in the Asia-Pacific region. But the Americans hijacked it and to make it their own, and in order to meet their own strategic interests. And then many people believe that FTAP is owned by the Chinese. That is also not the case. FTAP was initiated by the Americans as a counter response to the growing and regional integration in the Asia-Pacific during the Hanoi Summit, APEC Summit in 2005. So these are the realities which are now taking place in our part of the world. And I think the Pacific Alliance countries have their own calculuses, strategic and commercial calculuses in playing a game as a major player. So I think they might play a very significant role in the emerging Pacific century, perhaps in the form of balancing security ties with Washington, if I may say so.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Dr. Minju.
Yeah, thank you. This is a very lively discussion. I think my big takeaway is the discussion about the cooperation between the Asia and Latin America should go beyond the government to government, should go to the real life, should go to the business to business, should go to the people to people, university to university, and the people to people as well. From our friends, the senator from Mexico, from our two speakers, friends from South Korea, from Indonesia speakers, and from Singapore. So I think that they all have the sense we have to check the reality. So we need to combine the cooperation and the competition. We need to facilitate the people-to-people contact. I think that's the most important thing. Our friends from South Korea say Korean people share very much value system with Latin American family value, pay attention on education, like music, like soccer. But I think this is more like an Asian culture. But I want to add one more thing. Both people in the two sides love hot and spicy food. So promote the people-to-people contact, I think is very important. The second point is, from my position from IMF, the both sides are our members. So we work for the both sides. And we do promote cooperation and integration from these two big continents. We do believe this is a big trend for this 21st century. We will serve our members from both sides, but also we want to ensure in this cooperation process, we will be able to maintain the macro stability. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, one of the things that was clear from this discussion is that there is a great deal of interest in engagement, and the question is how one does it. I think that we should all take away Pak Marty's call for understanding the limitations caused by the realities of institutional congestion. A lot of support for the idea of some Pacific Alliance ASEAN engagement. Perhaps that Pacific Alliance ASEAN engagement can take place in the context of an APEC meeting without making things too difficult or confusing agendas too much. There was a huge amount of emphasis on the need for business-led integration, and indeed Marielle Green mentioned it in the first session, and it's been mentioned by many people in this second plenary, and that's why following your thanks to the speakers and following a lunch, I hope that you all return to listen to business perspectives on the Trans-Pacific opportunity, because it's precisely in that session that we'll try to examine what the practicalities might be of more Trans-Pacific business engagement. But before you do that, and before you enjoy your lunch, could you please join me in thanking the four speakers for inspiring this debate.